The tension on the luxury yacht was palpable as wealthy guests watched in stunned silence. Jason Reynolds, the arrogant yacht owner, publicly humiliated an elderly black man in worn clothes, unaware of the decorated military career hidden behind those weary eyes. Thomas Washington stood quietly at the yacht's railing, his weathered hands gripping the polished metal. At 72, his once-straight military posture had given way to a pronounced stoop, his brown skin now creased with deep wrinkles earned through 45 years of military service. His faded button-up shirt, simple khaki pants, and scuffed leather shoes looked woefully out of place among the designer outfits surrounding him. Few aboard recognized that this humble-looking elderly man was retired three-star General Thomas Washington, one of the most decorated military leaders of his generation. His career spanned from Vietnam to the Gulf War, earning him the Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Silver Stars, and countless other honors. He had commanded thousands, advised presidents, and shaped military strategy that saved countless American lives. Since retirement, Washington lived modestly in a small Virginia home filled with books rather than medals. He rarely spoke of his accomplishments, preferring instead to volunteer at veterans programs and mentor young service members. His invitation to this charity yacht event came from the Veterans Foundation he quietly supported with half his military pension. Washington maintained the disciplines of military life, rising at 5 a.m. daily, keeping his modest home spotless, and addressing everyone with the same respect regardless of their station. His old friends often joked that you could take the general out of the army, but never the army out of the general. Today, however, that lifetime of discipline would face an unexpected test. The Lady Fortune was a 120-foot vision of opulence, gleaming brass fixtures, polished teak decks, and crystal chandeliers that sparkled even in daylight. Champagne flowed freely as Miami's elite mingled at this exclusive fundraiser, supposedly supporting veterans' causes. Jason Reynolds, the yacht's 45-year-old owner, moved through the crowd with practiced confidence. His tech company had gone public last year, catapulted him into wealth he seemed desperate to flaunt. His crisp white linen suit and diamond-studded watch broadcast his newfound status to everyone aboard. Washington had been invited as an honored guest by the foundation, though no formal introduction had been planned. The general had specifically requested to attend quietly. He stood alone, observing the proceedings with a slight smile, occasionally nodding politely to passing guests. The collision course was set when Reynolds, noticing Washington by the expensive seafood display, frowned visibly. Something about the elderly black man's presence seemed to offend his sense of exclusivity. With a quick whisper to his assistant, Reynolds began making his way toward Washington, his expression hardening with each step. "Excuse me," Reynolds called out, his voice cutting through nearby conversations. "I think you might be in the wrong place." Washington turned slowly, his kind eyes meeting Reynolds' cold stare. "I don't believe so, sir. I was invited to this event." Reynolds' laugh was sharp, drawing attention from nearby guests. "Really? You have an invitation to my private fundraiser." His gaze swept dismissively over Washington's modest attire. "Maybe you misunderstood. The service entrance is below deck." An uncomfortable silence fell over the nearby guests. A woman in pearls shifted awkwardly, looking away. A gentleman in a navy blazer cleared his throat but said nothing. "I assure you, I am a guest," Washington replied calmly, his deep voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command, though softened by age. The Veterans Foundation extended an invitation. Reynolds snapped his fingers at a crew member. "Check this gentleman's invitation, please." The way he emphasized gentleman made the word sound like an insult. The young crew member approached hesitantly. "Sir, may I see your invitation?" Washington reached into his worn wallet and produced a slightly creased invitation card. The crew member examined it, nodding. "This appears to be in order, Mr. Reynolds." Reynolds snatched the card, studying it with narrowed eyes. "Thomas Washington? Never heard of you." He handed the card back with 2 fingers, as if touching something distasteful. "Well, Mr. Washington, while you may have an invitation, I'd appreciate if you'd stay away from the other guests. Your appearance is concerning some of my friends." Washington absorbed the insult with the same stoic dignity that had carried him through battlefield horrors. His face remained impassive, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. Not anger, but a deep, resigned recognition of a battle he fought countless times before. As the afternoon progressed, Reynolds' behavior toward Washington became increasingly hostile. The yacht owner had stationed himself near the bar, glass of bourbon in hand, watching Washington with undisguised contempt. "You know," Reynolds announced loudly to his circle of acquaintances, gesturing toward Washington, "I support veterans as much as anyone, but there's a certain standard expected at these events." Washington stood alone by the railing, seemingly absorbed in watching the waves, though his military training had taught him to be aware of everything around him. Every word reached him clearly. "I mean, look at him," Reynolds continued, his voice carrying deliberately. "Probably claims he was some kind of hero, when we all know what jobs they usually gave people like him in the military." Several guests looked uncomfortable. One woman whispered, "Jason, please." "What?" Reynolds replied, louder still, "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." He probably heard free food and found himself an invitation somewhere. He laughed, encouraging others to join in. Few did. Reynolds signaled to his personal security guard, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit. "Keep an eye on our shabby friend. Make sure no silverware goes missing." The security guard frowned but nodded reluctantly. Washington's weathered hands tightened slightly on the railing. In his mind, he wasn't on a luxury yacht, but back in 1968, a young lieutenant facing far more dangerous prejudice in his first command. He remembered his commanding officer's words. "Washington, they'll judge you twice, once for your color, once for your rank. Your only defense is excellence." He'd carried that lesson through decades of service, through rooms where he was often the only black face, through promotions where his qualifications were constantly questioned. This was hardly the first time he'd been underestimated or insulted. The battlefield had taught him that reacting from anger only gave the enemy advantage. Patience had won him more victories than rage ever could. Still, there was something particularly painful about facing such disrespect at an event meant to honor the very service Reynolds was mocking. A young server, barely 20 with close-cropped hair and alert eyes, had been watching the situation unfold. He approached Reynolds with a tray of champagne, his hands slightly trembling. "Excuse me, sir," the young man said quietly. "I believe that gentleman is General Thomas Washington. My grandfather served under him in Desert Storm." Reynolds scoffed. "General? Please, you expect me to believe that old man is a general?" "Three-star general, sir," the server continued, his voice gaining confidence. "My grandfather has his picture on our wall at home. He says General Washington saved their entire unit." "Know your place, boy," Reynolds hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Serve the drinks and keep your fantasies to yourself, or you'll be looking for another job." The server's face flushed with embarrassment. As he turned away, he found Washington standing beside him, having approached silently despite his age. "It's all right, son," Washington said gently, placing a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "Thank you for your grandfather's service. Tell him Thomas Washington remembers the brave men of the 82nd. The simple dignity in Washington's voice made Reynolds' cruelty seem suddenly small and ugly by comparison. Reynolds, embarrassed and further agitated by Washington's calm response, decided to escalate the situation. He stepped directly into Washington's path as the elderly man made his way toward the dessert table. "I've had enough of this charade," Reynolds announced, his voice carrying across the deck. "This event is for supporting real veterans, not imposters looking for handouts." Washington stopped, his stooped frame still managing to project a quiet dignity. "Sir, I've done nothing to offend you," he said softly. "Your presence offends me," Reynolds snapped. "Look at you, stooped over, dressed like you shopped at a thrift store. And you expect us to believe you're some decorated officer?" He turned to the gathering crowd of uncomfortable guests. "Do you know what they did with most black recruits during Vietnam? They put them in the kitchen or had them digging latrines. Yet this guy wants us to believe he was commanding troops." Gasps rippled through the crowd. An elderly woman covered her mouth in shock. "Son," Washington said, his voice still measured but carrying the weight of decades of command, "you're embarrassing yourself, not me." "Don't you son me, old man," Reynolds shouted, his face reddening. "I want you off my yacht. Now, before I have security throw you overboard." He stepped closer, towering over Washington's stooped frame. "Did you really think you could crash my party, eat my food, and fool everyone with your made-up war stories? What's next? Claiming you were a general, maybe even Colin Powell's best friend." The cruelty hung in the air, made worse by the sacred setting of a veterans' charity event. Several guests began to move away, unwilling to witness further abuse, but equally unwilling to intervene. Washington stood perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Reynolds' face, his expression one profound sadness rather than anger. The tense standoff was interrupted by commotion at the yacht's entrance. A distinguished woman in a conservative business suit rushed onto the deck, followed by the event coordinator. "Mr. Reynolds," the coordinator said breathlessly, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. This is Patricia Lawson, director of the Veterans Foundation." Ms. Lawson looked around frantically until her eyes landed on Washington. Her expression shifted immediately to one of mortification. "General Washington," she said, moving quickly to his side, "I am so deeply sorry for the delay. We had planned to introduce you properly before your speech." Reynolds' face froze in confusion. "Speech? What speech?" From across the deck, an older gentleman in a blazer with a navy pin on the lapel stepped forward, his back straight despite his years. As he neared Washington, he snapped to attention and offered perfect salute. "General Washington, sir. Commander Peter Harrison, retired. It's an honor to be in your presence again." Washington returned the salute with military precision that belied his stooped posture. "At ease, Commander. Good to see you again." Ms. Lawson turned to address the now silent crowd. "For those who don't know, we are incredibly privileged to have Lieutenant General Thomas Washington with us today. General Washington led the Eastern Division during Operation Desert Storm, was awarded 2 Silver Stars for valor in Vietnam, and later served as Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations Command." Washington reached into his worn wallet and removed a faded military ID card, holding it up not in triumph, but simply as quiet confirmation. The revelation rippled through the yacht. Guests who had remained silent during Reynolds' abuse now looked stricken. The young server who had tried to intervene stood tall, vindicated. Reynolds' face drained of color, his mouth open and closed without producing sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. What made the moment truly powerful wasn't just a revelation of Washington's rank, but the stark contrast between the general's humble bearing and Reynolds' gaudy display, between true dignity and its hollow imitation. The yacht had fallen completely silent. Even the gentle lapping of waves against the hull seemed muted, as if nature itself was waiting to hear what would happen next. Washington straightened his stooped back as much as his aged frame would allow. When he spoke, his voice was neither loud nor angry, but carried the natural authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, "there's no need for embarrassment. You couldn't have known who I was, and that's partly by design. I've never been comfortable with recognition." He looked around at the assembled guests, his gaze taking in each face. "When I joined the military in 1968, many people had very firm ideas about what a black man could or couldn't do. Some of those barriers were written into law. Others were just understood. Either way, they were meant to be limitations." Washington gestured to his simple clothes. "I learned early that appearances are perhaps the least reliable measure of a person's capability or character. Some of the finest soldiers I ever commanded came from nothing. Some of the bravest acts I witnessed were performed by men society had discounted." He turned back to Reynolds, his expression not unkind. "I don't share my accomplishments because ranks and medals aren't what matter most. What matters is the service itself. The willingness to put something large in yourself ahead of your own comfort or safety." Washington's weathered hand moved to rest over his heart. "This uniform I'm wearing today may look like ordinary civilian clothes to you, but to me, it represents the highest privilege of my life. Serving alongside Americans of every color, faith, and background, united by shared purpose rather than divided by superficial differences." The old general's eyes, still sharp beneath his wrinkled brow, surveyed the opulent yacht. "I've been in rooms with presidents and in foxholes with privates. I've learned that dignity isn't something conferred by wealth or circumstance. It's a quality we build through our actions and choices. He nodded toward the young server, who had tried to defend him. That young man showed more courage and character in speaking up than many show in a lifetime. His grandfather would be proud. Washington turned to Ms. Lawson. I believe I was invited to speak about supporting our veterans. With your permission, I'd like to do so now. Not by dwelling on this incident, but by focusing on the thousands of veterans who need our genuine support, not just our symbolic gestures. Reynolds attempted an apology, stepping forward with hand extended. General, I can't begin to express how sorry I... Washington raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Your apology would mean more directed toward changing your behavior than easing your conscience, Mr. Reynolds. The Foundation director quickly announced that General Washington would now deliver his planned remarks about veteran support initiatives. Reynolds, thoroughly humbled, retreated to the periphery of his own yacht, no longer the center of attention. Later that evening, the Foundation announced that Reynolds had made a generous additional donation to their housing program for homeless veterans, triple the amount he had initially pledged. Few doubted the motivation behind this sudden generosity. Washington declined the honorarium typically offered to keynote speakers, requesting instead that those funds be directed toward supporting families of fallen service members. His speech focused not on his own achievements, but on the ongoing struggles many veterans face upon returning to civilian life. After the event, several guests approached Washington individually, some to apologize for their silence during Reynolds' tirade, others to share stories of veterans and their own families. The young server who had attempted to intervene was personally thanked by the Foundation director. By week's end, he would receive a job offer from a veteran-owned business whose owner had been in attendance. As for Reynolds, his yacht remained docked, but he himself was nowhere to be seen during the speech or the remainder of the event, a conspicuous absence on his own vessel. The incident aboard the Lady Fortune didn't remain private for long. Several guests had recorded portions of the confrontation and Washington's response. Within days, the video spread across social media platforms, sparking nationwide conversations about respect, service, and judgment based on appearance. News programs invited military historians and social commentators to discuss General Washington's distinguished yet under-recognized career. Many highlighted the persistent challenges faced by black service members throughout American military history, from segregated units to unequal recognition. Veterans organizations reported a surge in donations and volunteer applications. Military leaders incorporated the incident into training materials about dignity and leadership under pressure. In his only interview about the event, Washington deflected attention from himself. This isn't about one man's mistake or another man's resume, he told a reporter. It's about recognizing that valor, intelligence, and leadership come in all forms, often where we least expect to find them. Reynolds issued a formal public apology and announced a new corporate initiative funding scholarships for minority students pursuing military careers. Whether this represented genuine growth or image management remained a matter of public debate. Washington simply returned to his quiet life, continuing to mentor young service members with the same humble dignity he had always embodied. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their appearance? Or witnessed someone being disrespected despite their service? Share your thoughts in the comments below. How do we show proper respect to our veterans beyond just words? Comment respect. It costs nothing but means everything to those who served.